Namaste and welcome back. In the previous video, we talked about the 3 P's of passion, purpose, and personality. To summarize, people usually think that their personality is something that's fixed and that it's innate, and having this can be extremely like a limiting perspective because it's kind of passive and it's not proactive. But the more evolved you become as a person, the more you realize that you get to choose what you're passionate about. You get to choose meaningful experiences and you get to ultimately decide your personality. Today I want to take a moment to talk to you about one of my favorite movies, Disney Pixar's Soul. It was just the right movie for me at the right time, and I've already watched it a bunch of times, but basically the themes of the movie really hit me because of how deeply true it is in my own life and how it has so many gems to offer, even though it's just a kid's movie. So today I tried to summarize just 3 of my key takeaways. And so the story goes that there's a middle school teacher named Joe Gardner, and his life hasn't gone quite the way that he expected. He is a jazz musician and he's extremely good at it. He believes that his whole life is about jazz music, and one fine day he gets his big break. He gets to play for Dorothea Williams, and on that day he has a near-death experience. I know it's a bit dark for a Disney movie, I get it, but while he's lying comatose in his bed in the hospital, this whole backscheme of what happens to his soul is the whole movie. Basically, the soul gets sent to this thing called the Great Before, and it's this place where all these little souls come in together before they get their Earth badge and they jump into Earth. And the purpose of the Great Before is so that these mentors can really help these little souls find their spark and their meaning or their purpose in life that will then eventually help them to live a happy and productive life down on Earth. So, a nice concept, but one of the questions I think it really poses, and something I'd like you to deeply reflect upon today, is this question of what makes you you. And we can ask ourselves this 1,000 times, yogically, generally, in the context of our careers, in the context of our family, and still there's so many layers to this onion that are still to be discovered. Because we live in a society where just finding from a really, really young age, like 5 maybe, that we're taught to make that decision. We're asked all the time, so what do you want to be when you grow up? So what do you want to be when you grow up? And I just think that this kind of makes people truly boxed in some way. As Indians, we're told you can either become a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure, and you just have to do this. You definitely have to do this, otherwise you're not living up to your true potential. And of course there's many flaws with this, and the literature is evolving and people are evolving, but for Joe Gardner, the protagonist, he builds his entire identity around being a jazz player. And for those of you who need a little bit of a refresher, an identity or your identity is the way in which you view yourself. It's how you explain yourself to yourself. And of course it's shaped by experiences in the past. But here's the thing, right? It need not solely be based on just the experiences you've had up until this point. Your identity can be defined by the experiences that you intend to create, that you intend to have, because then you can proactively go and create those transformational experiences. So I think one thing to keep in mind is we are not born with a purpose in life. And this is the number one thing that I'd say I took away from this entire movie, which is that we're not born with just a singular purpose. It's not one thing that we're here to do. And one of my favorite things about this film is that Joe Gardner, who's the protagonist, makes this movie thinking that he goes through his life thinking that he has this grand plan, this grand purpose laid out for him. And he thinks that music or playing jazz is his purpose. It's why he was brought down to earth and this is what he was meant to do. But music itself wasn't his purpose. Well, why does it matter? It wasn't his spark. But here's the thing, right? It need not solely be based on the experiences that you've had in the past. Your identity can be defined by all the experiences that you intend to create in the future, because then you can proactively go and create those transformational experiences. right? We're not born with a singular purpose in this life. And one of my favorite things about this film and the message it portrays is that we are not born with this singular purpose in life. And that's one of the key mistakes that Joe Gardner makes, is that throughout the movie he thinks that he has this grand plan laid out for him. And for him, he thinks that music is that thing. And that's his purpose. It's why he was brought down to earth, and it's what he was meant to do. But you see, music wasn't his purpose in life. Music was his spark. Well, you're like, what's the difference between a spark and a purpose? It might be slightly different, but having a purpose is different from having a spark, because having a purpose in life involves the idea that you're meant to live a life for some specific reason, and that's the reason why you're brought into the world. A spark isn't your purpose. A spark is that thing that makes you come alive. In this moment, just close your eyes and ask yourself, what is that spark? What is the thing that makes me come alive? Let's take a moment together, just breathe in and breathe out, and just pause and marinate that question in your mind for a second, because the spark isn't your purpose. It's just what makes you come alive. And Soul looks at this so beautifully, Humans don't have a predetermined path. Like, you don't have some sort of big objective that you need to achieve. You don't need to make a lot of money. You don't need to have a job that's extremely good for your family. It's about finding your spark, or more than just finding a spark, it's about finding moments of sparks. And you don't necessarily have to have a job that completely fulfills you, the perfect picket fence house or this perfect family. Rather, you should just sort of focus on all those moments, all those moments that make life truly, truly worth living. And this comes back down to my thesis topic, which was what it means to lead a good life. A life of eudaimonia, a life where you're living up to your highest potentials, you're truly thriving and not just surviving. And this is another theme for another day, I understand. But just, this was entirely just to give you an idea of the distinction between your personality, your identity, and your spark. Yeah? Awesome. Number 2 is that there's nothing wrong with regular old living. Quite often, even just listening to that makes me feel like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing these grand things, and if I don't do all these grand things, will I just be normal? It's actually one of my biggest fears, and to be honest with you, we're so focused on trying to get somewhere and do something that we don't see how all lives and all paths do have merit. They have meaning, and every life is worth living in the way that if you fully live it. You know what I mean? It's this idea that you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be successful. This is best shown in the film when Dorothea Williams tells Joe a story towards the end. She says, I heard this story about a fish. He swims up to this older fish and says, I'm trying to find this thing they call the ocean. And then the fish asks, the ocean? The older fish? And the older fish is just like, that's where you are right now. But the younger fish is like, this is water. I want to get to the ocean. So it's kind of this question of, we're already swimming in this amrita, we're already swimming in this place of bliss, but we're quite often just deluded by the configuration of our lives in the present moment. And of course, this is the same thing as the individual Atman and the absolute Brahman concept in Indian philosophy, which is that the individual Atman, or the immediate soul, the soul that's present in the individual's body, is one and the same as the Brahman, or the totality of consciousness. Of course, you can contend with this and make philosophical discussion for years and decades on this, but this is important because it's also a goal of yoga. You see, it's this notion that there is this union with God, this union with the ultimate ocean, is not a process of discovery, but a process of remembrance. It's a process of recollection that comes from dissolving the veil of ignorance, and that we are in the water trying to find this thing called the ocean all the time, swimming and trying, but we're already there. And the last takeaway would be that we don't know what happens next. If 2020 and this whole pandemic has taught us anything, I think it certainly taught us this, The idea of an afterlife is, of course, been long debated in these circles of spirituality, but within the movie, we don't get to see what path Joe actually decides to follow. Whether he decides to become a full-time musician or just be a great middle school teacher. We don't really know, and that's kind of the point, I guess. We don't know where this life will take us, and whatever it is, whatever path we are meant to be on, it's still that it should be worth living by finding moments of spark. All we know for sure is that our identity shapes our behavior and our actions, and even the story that we tell ourselves. And I would really challenge you to hold your identity based on your future self, not on some past self that you've accumulated from just conditioning, societal conditioning, your own past, and just your patterns of habit, And ultimately, your behavior will then shape your future and your future self. So for today, I want you to get really, really intentional about your identity. What are you actually pursuing? What is your purpose? What is your spark? And what are your goals? Just write this down and think about it. Allow these ideas to marinate in your mind, because the goal, that thing, is the thing that's shaping your current perspective and ultimately shaping your behavior. For a lot of people, they haven't really thought about it, and it might be that their goal is literally to, just get fit or look good on social media. Whatever it is, that's the thing, right? Shaping yourself, that's the thing that's shaping the way you see yourself. It's shaping your actions, and it's ultimately shaping your personality. So I want you to just get super intentional and ask yourself these questions about, what is it that makes me come alive? What makes me me? And when you can answer that question from the deepest core of your being, from a meditative space, from a space of peeling all the layers of your personality and really just arriving at a consensus that you're comfortable with, then you start to tell a new story about yourself, which is maybe inconsistent with your former self, but truly consistent with your future self. And that will allow you to start driving your behavior towards your goals, which means you're actually acting intentionally. And when you start acting intentionally rather than just going on autopilot, you become your future self. You're actually going to be who you want to be, which is, of course, sometimes outside your comfort zone, but your identity should be consciously designed based on the person you want to become, not based on the behaviors that drove you to this moment, if they were bad. So you're actually doing that thing today, and you're going to really get intentional. Ask yourself, what makes you you? Ask yourself, what makes you come alive? And ask yourself, what can you do today to create one moment of spark, one moment that just makes you come alive? And if you were to just die as a mediocre person, would you be okay with that? Namaste.